Some horses don't fear men, they remember them. The man hit the ground hard, dust rising in a slow, quiet cloud beneath the late afternoon sun, and for a moment, no one moved, no one breathed, because standing over him was the horse no one dared to touch, its chest heaving, its dark coat catching the light like something carved from storm clouds, eyes sharp and alive in a way that made people uneasy, as if it could see straight through every lie they carried into that arena. And somewhere in the crowd a woman whispered that no one had ever lasted more than a few seconds near it, not without being thrown back like a rag, not without walking away shaken, or worse, and yet the horse didn't strike again, didn't even step forward, it simply stood there, watching, as if waiting for something that hadn't happened yet, and then the shouting started, men rushing in, boots pounding against packed dirt, voices overlapping, angry, nervous, trying to reclaim control of something that had slipped just out of their hands, and above it all, from the shaded balcony lined with polished wood and quiet wealth, Victor Hale leaned forward with a slow, satisfied smile, his fingers resting lightly on the railing as if he owned not just the land, not just the people gathered beneath him, but the fear itself that filled the air, because this was his show, his arena, his proof that some things in this world were not meant to be challenged unless you had the power to control them, and control, to Victor Hale, was worth far more than the $2 million he had already promised to anyone foolish enough to try, and as the fallen man was dragged away and the dust began to settle again, the horse turned its head slightly, ears twitching, catching a sound too quiet for anyone else to notice, something beyond the noise, beyond the crowd, something that made it pause in a way that didn't fit the story everyone believed about it, because this wasn't just a ferocious animal. Not entirely, there was something else there, something buried under layers of fear and memory, something waiting, and 24 hours earlier, before the crowd had gathered and the bets had been whispered like rumors of a coming storm, before Victor Hale had stepped forward to declare his challenge in a voice that carried across the Texas plains, a man named Ethan Cole stood alone at the edge of a dirt road just outside town, his boots worn from miles of quiet work, his hat pulled low against a sun that had long since stopped feeling warm, watching dust drift across the horizon as if the land itself had forgotten how to hold on to anything. And he hadn't planned to come into town that day, hadn't planned to step into a world where men like Victor Hale turned animals into symbols and fear into entertainment, but something in the air had shifted, subtle, almost invisible, the kind of feeling a man learns to trust after losing more than he ever thought he could carry, and when the wind changed direction, it carried with it a distant sound, faint but unmistakable, the sharp, restless echo of a horse that did not belong to silence. And Ethan lifted his head just slightly, his eyes narrowing not in fear, but in recognition, because some sounds don't leave you, no matter how far you walk away from them, and somewhere deep in his chest, something stirred, not hope, not yet, but the quiet beginning of it, the kind that moves slowly, like a shadow stretching across the ground at sunset, waiting for the moment when it can no longer be ignored. The air in the arena seemed to hold its breath as Ethan stood there, neither advancing nor retreating, his presence quiet but unyielding, and the horse responded in kind, its stance softening by degrees so small they would have gone unnoticed by anyone who was not truly paying attention, its ears no longer pinned in restless tension but shifting forward, curious, uncertain, as if the rhythm it had learned to expect from men had suddenly changed, and in the stands, the whispers grew, not louder, but sharper, people leaning closer, sensing that something was unfolding that did not fit the script they had come to watch, because this was not how it usually went. There was no sudden charge, no chaotic display, just a slow, deliberate exchange that felt more like a conversation than a contest, and Victor Hale's expression, though still composed, lost a fraction of its certainty, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the man in the dirt below, trying to understand what made him different, what gave him the audacity to stand there without fear, and Ethan did not look up, did not acknowledge the weight of that gaze, because his attention remained fixed on the horse, on the subtle movements that spoke louder than any words could, the way its breath came in steady pulls now instead of sharp bursts, the way its weight shifted not to flee but to stay, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, Ethan lowered his shoulders, letting the tension drain from his frame, offering no challenge, no demand, only the quiet presence of someone who was willing to wait, and time stretched in that space, measured not in seconds but in heartbeats, until Ethan finally took a single step forward, careful, measured, his boot pressing into the dirt with a softness that matched the moment. And the horse did not recoil, did not lash out, it only watched him more closely, its dark eyes reflecting something that no one else in the arena could fully understand, and Ethan felt it then, a memory brushing against the edges of his mind, not clear enough to name, but strong enough to guide him, because there was something familiar in the way the horse held itself, something that reached back into a part of his life he had tried to leave behind, and without thinking, he let his voice rise just enough to carry across the small distance between them, low and steady, not a command but a presence, a sound shaped more by intention than by words, and the horse's ears flicked forward at that, its body stilling further, as if it recognized the tone even if it could not yet place it, and Ethan took another step, closing the gap inch by inch, until the space between them felt less like a barrier and more like a threshold, and the crowd shifted again, their anticipation turning into something quieter, something almost reverent, because they were witnessing something they did not know how to explain, a man who did not force, a horse that did not fight, and between them, a fragile thread of trust beginning to take shape, and from above, Victor's hand tightened slightly on the rail, the first sign that the outcome he had been so certain of was no longer entirely within his control, because whatever was happening in that arena was no longer about proving dominance, it was about uncovering something hidden, something neither money nor power could command, and as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dirt, Ethan lifted his hand slowly, stopping just short of reaching out, allowing the horse the choice to close the final distance, and in that suspended moment, the entire world seemed to narrow to the space between them, where fear and memory met something quieter, something stronger, something that had been waiting far longer than anyone there could have known. For a long moment, nothing moved, not the crowd, not the wind, not even the dust that seemed to hang suspended in the golden light, because the space between Ethan's outstretched hand and the horse's quiet, watchful gaze had become something more than distance, it had become a question waiting for an answer, and the horse shifted its weight again, not away this time, but forward, a subtle motion that rippled through its body like a decision forming from somewhere deep within, and Ethan did not rush it, did not lean in or speak again, he simply stood there, steady as the land beneath his boots, allowing the moment to unfold in its own time, and the horse lowered its head just slightly, nostrils flaring as it drew in his scent, as if searching for something familiar buried beneath years of dust and silence, and that was when Ethan felt it more clearly, that quiet pull tightening in his chest, not fear, not even hope, but recognition, the kind that does not come from memory alone, but from something deeper, something that lives in the spaces where words never reach, and his fingers trembled just enough to remind him that this mattered, more than the money, more than the watching eyes, more than anything he could have explained if he tried, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the horse took a single step closer, closing the final inches between them, and the entire arena seemed to lean into that moment, the crowd holding its breath as if afraid that even the smallest sound might shatter what was happening before them, and Ethan's hand remained still, open, unthreatening, until at last the horse's muzzle brushed against his palm, light as a whisper, a touch so brief it could have been imagined, yet real enough to send a quiet ripple through everything that stood around them, and a murmur spread through the stands, disbelief softening into something closer to awe, because the animal they had feared, the one they had turned into a challenge and a spectacle, had just chosen to step forward on its own, and Ethan closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, feeling the warmth of that contact, the steady breath against his skin, and in that instant, the noise of the world fell away completely, replaced by a memory that rose unbidden, a younger version of himself standing in a sunlit field, a different horse pressing its head against his shoulder, the same quiet trust, the same unspoken understanding, and he exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the present as he let his hand move just enough to rest gently against the horse's face, not gripping, not claiming, only acknowledging, and the horse did not pull away, it remained there, still and steady, its dark eyes softening in a way that no one in that arena had ever seen before, and above them, Victor Hale straightened, his confidence shifting into something tighter, something less certain, because what he was witnessing did not fit the narrative he had built, it could not be explained by force or dominance or even luck, and the crowd began to stir, their voices rising again, but this time not with laughter or mockery, instead with questions, with disbelief, with the realization that something had just changed in a way they could not easily dismiss, and Ethan kept his focus on the horse, his hand resting there as if it had always belonged, and as the sun dipped lower behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the arena floor, the fragile connection between them grew stronger, not because it was forced, but because it had been given the space to exist, and in that quiet, undeniable moment, the first crack appeared in the story everyone had come to believe, revealing something far more powerful beneath it. The touch did not break, and that alone unsettled the rhythm of the entire arena, because what had just happened was not supposed to last, it was supposed to be a moment, brief and fragile, something that would collapse under its own weight, yet it held, quiet and steady, as if time itself had slowed to make room for it, and Ethan kept his hand where it was, feeling the warmth beneath the horse's skin, the subtle movement of breath, the life that pulsed there without resistance, and for a brief second, he allowed himself to close his eyes again, not to escape the moment, but to listen to it more clearly, because there was something beneath the surface, something that did not belong to this arena or the crowd or the man watching from above, something older, something that carried the echo of a past he had never fully let go of, and when he opened his eyes, he noticed it, just along the horse's shoulder where the fading light traced the curve of muscle and scar, a mark, faint but unmistakable, pressed into the coat like a memory that refused to disappear, and his breath caught, not sharply, but enough to shift something inside him, because he had seen that mark before, years ago, in a place that no longer existed except in fragments, in quiet corners of his mind he rarely allowed himself to visit, and the horse shifted slightly under his hand, not pulling away, but turning its head just enough to look at him more directly, its dark eyes holding something that felt almost searching, almost questioning, as if it too sensed that this moment was not as simple as it appeared, and around them, the crowd began to move again, voices rising in confusion, in disbelief, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing, but their words felt distant now, like noise carried on the wind, because Ethan's focus had narrowed to that mark, to the way it curved just beneath the surface of the coat, to the way it matched a memory he had buried beneath years of silence, and slowly, carefully, he let his fingers trace just above it, not pressing, not claiming, only confirming what his instincts had already begun to tell him, and the horse did not flinch, did not tense, it remained still, as if allowing him to see what no one else had noticed, and something shifted in Ethan's chest then, something deeper than recognition, something closer to understanding, because this was not just a wild animal that had been brought into an arena for spectacle, this was a story that had been broken apart and scattered, and somehow, against all odds, it had found its way back to him, and above them, Victor Hale's expression hardened, the faint unease from before sharpening into something more deliberate, because he could feel the control slipping, not in a dramatic collapse, but in quiet, undeniable pieces, and he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the rising murmur, reminding the crowd of the rules, of the challenge, of the money that still hung in the balance, trying to pull the moment back into something he could define, something he could own. But the words did not land the way they had before, because the crowd had already seen something they could not unsee, a connection that did not belong to power or pride, and in the center of it all, Ethan stood with his hand resting against the horse's face, his eyes steady, no longer searching, because the truth had begun to take shape in a way that could not be undone, and as the last light of the sun dipped lower across the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the arena floor, the story that had been built around fear and control began to unravel. Thread by quiet thread, revealing something far more powerful beneath it, something that no wager, no challenge, no amount of money could ever hope to contain. The mark did not lie, and once Ethan saw it, he could not unsee it, the faint curve branded into the horse's shoulder like a whisper from another life, and something deep inside him shifted into place with a quiet certainty that did not need confirmation, because memories have a way of returning not as clear images but as feelings that settle into the bones, and this one carried the weight of years, of loss, of something taken before it was ever meant to be let go, and his hand remained steady against the horse's face as his eyes traced the line of that mark again, slower this time, as if giving himself permission to believe what his instincts had already accepted, and the horse responded in kind, its posture softening further, the tension that had once defined it now giving way to something quieter, something almost familiar, and Ethan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, the sound low and barely audible, Yet enough to draw the horse's attention closer, its ears flicking forward as if recognizing not the man himself, but the calm that surrounded him, and around them, the crowd continued to stir, voices rising and falling in uncertain waves, because they could feel the shift even if they could not explain it, the way the story had changed without warning, no longer a contest of strength or fear, but something deeper, something that did not belong to the spectacle they had come to witness. And Victor Hale watched it all with growing tension behind his composed expression, his fingers tightening slightly against the polished rail as he leaned forward, studying the interaction with a focus that no longer held amusement, because control, once absolute, had begun to slip into something unpredictable, and unpredictability was something he did not tolerate easily, and he spoke again, his voice sharper now, cutting through the murmurs with an edge that demanded attention, reminding everyone that the challenge had not changed, that touching the horse was not the same as mastering it, that the term still stood, $2 million for anyone who could prove dominance, but the words felt hollow as they settled over the arena, because what was happening below did not resemble dominance at all, and Ethan did not respond, did not even look up, because his focus had moved beyond the man above, beyond the crowd, beyond the noise, into something far more personal, something that had nothing to do with winning or losing, and slowly, with a care that came from understanding rather than hesitation, he shifted his hand slightly, letting his fingers brush along the side of the horse's face, tracing the line of its jaw in a motion so gentle it carried no demand, only recognition, and the horse leaned into it, just enough to make it clear that the connection was not imagined, that it was real, and in that small movement, something inside Ethan settled, not completely, but enough to bring clarity where there had been uncertainty, because this was not a stranger standing before him, not entirely, this was a story that had been broken and scattered and somehow, against every expectation, had found its way back into his life. And the realization did not come as a shock, but as a quiet unfolding. Like a door opening slowly after years of being closed, and as the last light of the sun dipped lower across the horizon, casting the arena in deeper shadows, Ethan understood that the moment they were standing in was not the end of something, but the beginning of a truth that would not stay hidden much longer, no matter how much the world around them tried to shape it into something else. The truth did not arrive like a thunderclap or a sudden revelation, it unfolded quietly, piece by piece, as if it had been waiting patiently for the right moment to be seen, and Ethan stood there with his hand resting against the horse, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his palm, the calm that had replaced the restless energy from before, and he knew now that what he had sensed was not coincidence, not chance, but something far more deliberate, something that had survived time and distance and everything in between, and he drew in a slow breath before letting his voice rise again, softer than before, shaped by memory rather than intention, a single word carried on the fading light, ash, and the horse's entire body shifted at the sound, not in fear, not in resistance, but in recognition, its ears lifting forward, its head tilting slightly as if searching for the meaning behind that name, and Ethan felt it then, the final piece falling into place, because there had only ever been one horse that responded like that, one presence that had once stood beside him in a field that no longer existed, under a sky that felt impossibly far away now, and the memory came back not as pain, but as something steady, something grounding, the image of a younger man and a horse that had trusted him. Without question, before everything had been taken, before the fire, before the silence that followed, and the horse before him leaned closer, pressing its head gently against his shoulder in a motion so natural it felt like it had never been lost, and a ripple moved through the crowd, no longer confusion, no longer disbelief, but something deeper, something that did not need explanation because it could be felt. And Victor Hale straightened sharply above them, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the tension beneath, because this was no longer his story to control, no longer a display of dominance or spectacle, it had become something else entirely, something he could not shape or command, and his voice cut through the arena once more, sharper now, demanding clarity, demanding explanation, asking who this man was and what trick he was playing, but Ethan did not answer right away, because some truths are not meant to be shouted, they are meant to be understood, and he slowly stepped back just enough to look at the horse fully, his hand still resting lightly against its neck, and in the fading light, the mark on its shoulder seemed clearer now, undeniable in its shape, the same mark he had seen years ago before everything had changed, and he lifted his gaze then, finally meeting Victor's eyes for the first time, not with defiance, not with anger, but with a calm that carried more weight than either. And when he spoke, his voice was steady, carrying across the arena without effort. "You called him wild," he said, the word simple but certain, but he was never wild, he was taken, and the silence that followed was deeper than anything that had come before, because in that moment, the story shifted completely, no longer about a man proving himself against a beast, but about something that had been lost finding its way back, and the crowd felt it, even if they could not fully understand it, the weight of a truth that had been hidden beneath noise and pride. And as the last light of the sun slipped below the horizon, leaving the arena in a softer, quieter glow, it became clear to everyone watching that what stood in the center of that circle was not a challenge to be won, but a bond that had never truly been broken, only waiting for the moment it could finally be seen again. The silence that followed did not break all at once, it settled slowly over the arena like the last light of day, soft and undeniable, as Ethan's words hung in the air, not as an accusation, not as a challenge, but as a truth that no one could easily turn away from. And Victor Hale remained still on the balcony, his posture rigid, his expression caught somewhere between disbelief and something far less comfortable, because for the first time since he had stepped into that role of control, the ground beneath it had shifted, not with force, but with something quieter and far more permanent. And below, in the center of the arena, Ethan stood beside the horse, his hand resting lightly against its neck, not claiming it, not presenting it, simply standing with it as if that had always been enough. And the horse, Ash, no longer carried the restless tension that had once defined it, its posture settled, its breath steady, its presence no longer a symbol of fear but something else entirely. Something that spoke of endurance, of memory, of a bond that had refused to disappear even when everything around it had changed. And the crowd began to move again, not with laughter or mockery, but with a quiet respect that replaced the noise that had filled the space before, because they had seen something they could not explain away, something that did not belong to spectacle or wager. And Victor finally spoke again, his voice lower now, stripped of the sharp edge it once carried, asking what Ethan intended to do, asking if he would take the money that had been promised, if he would claim the victory that had been laid before him. And Ethan looked up, meeting his gaze without hesitation, his expression calm, steady, untouched by the weight of what had just taken place. And for a moment, it seemed as though the entire outcome rested in that silence between them, not as a negotiation, but as a choice. And Ethan shook his head slowly, the gesture simple but certain. He was never yours to bet on, he said, his voice carrying across the arena with quiet clarity. And the words did not land like defiance, they landed like closure, like something being set back into its rightful place after too long. And Victor said nothing in return, because there was nothing left to say that would change what had already been revealed. And as the last of the daylight faded completely, the arena lights flickered on, casting a softer glow over the scene. Ethan reached for the rope that hung loosely nearby, not to restrain, not to control, but simply to guide. And Ash followed without resistance, stepping beside him with a calm that needed no instruction. And together they walked toward the edge of the arena, not as a man leading a conquered animal, but as two beings moving in quiet understanding. And the crowd parted without being asked, giving them space as they passed, their voices lowered, their eyes following not with curiosity, but with something closer to respect. And when Ethan reached the gate, he paused for just a moment, his hand resting once more against Ash's neck, feeling the steady presence that had found its way back to him against all odds. And then he stepped through, leaving the arena behind, leaving the wager, the challenge, the spectacle to fade into the night. And as he walked toward the open road beyond, the wind carried a softness that had not been there before, as if the land itself recognized the quiet return of something it had once lost. And somewhere in the distance, under a sky now filled with the first stars of evening, the sound of steady hoofbeats faded into the dark, leaving behind a truth that lingered long after the moment had passed, that sometimes the wildest things are not meant to be tamed, only understood, and that even after everything is taken, what is real has a way of finding its way back home.